The most important person in the room was not the billionaire, the investors, or the politicians. It was the woman nobody noticed. The ballroom fell silent so suddenly that even the soft music seemed to disappear. Hundreds of guests stood beneath crystal chandeliers inside one of Manhattan's most exclusive charity galas, their conversations frozen in place as every eye turned toward the center of the room. Ethan Harrison, Billionaire CEO, stood beside a microphone near the main stage. His jaw was tight. His shoulders were rigid. Weeks of pressure seemed to be resting on him at once. Across from him stood his wife, Olivia Harrison, one hand resting gently against her pregnant stomach. Her expression was calm, but there was sadness in her eyes. Nobody knew exactly how the disagreement had started. Most had only witnessed the final moments. Ethan had been speaking with investors when he noticed a sealed envelope in Olivia's hand. Since then, tension had spread through the room like a storm cloud. "Why would you keep something like this from me?" Ethan asked, his voice carrying farther than he intended. Nearby conversations stopped immediately. Olivia lowered her eyes. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Ethan shook his head. "By hiding things." The disappointment in his voice felt heavier than anger. Guests exchanged nervous glances. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The Harrison family represented power, influence, and wealth. People who normally offered opinions on everything suddenly became very interested in their champagne glasses. Across the ballroom, Naomi Carter adjusted the black apron tied neatly around her waist and watched from a distance. She had spent years working events like this. Wealthy people often believed nobody noticed them when they were surrounded by staff. They were wrong. Waitresses noticed everything. Naomi could usually sense when an argument was built on truth and when it was built on fear. What she saw in Olivia's face did not look like guilt. It looked like worry. Deep worry. Ethan continued speaking, though now his frustration seemed directed more at himself than anyone else. "Do you know what this month has been like?" he asked. "The company is under pressure. Investors are watching every move. I needed honesty." Olivia held the envelope closer. "I know. Then why keep secrets?" The question lingered in the air. Several guests looked away uncomfortably. Others pretended to check their phones. Nobody wanted to become involved. That was the strange thing about public moments. Everyone witnessed them. Very few participated. Naomi watched Olivia carefully. The pregnant woman looked exhausted. Not defensive. Not angry. Exhausted. There was a difference. Ethan seemed unable to see it. Stress had narrowed his focus. The more he spoke, the less he appeared to hear anything except his own fears. Around them, executives whispered. Investors remained silent. A few hotel employees exchanged worried looks before returning to work. Naomi continued observing. Something felt wrong. Not with Ethan's emotions. His frustration seemed real enough. What felt wrong was the assumption beneath it. Olivia's eyes kept returning to the envelope. Not because she wanted to hide it. Because she seemed afraid of what would happen once it was opened. Naomi had seen that look before. It was the look of someone carrying difficult news alone. Near the stage, Ethan took a slow breath and tried to compose himself, but the damage had already been done. The room felt tense. Uncomfortable. Olivia remained silent. The envelope never left her hand. The longer she held it, the more curious everyone became. Yet nobody dared ask what was inside. Naomi felt her heart beat a little faster. She did not know what the envelope contained. She did not know the Harrisons personally. But every instinct told her that the story unfolding in front of the ballroom was not the story Ethan believed he was seeing. 10 minutes from now, that instinct would lead her to do something no investor, executive, politician, or guest was willing to do. And before the night ended, an entire family would be changed because one waitress refused to look away. 1 hour earlier, the ballroom looked nothing like the tense scene it would soon become. Music drifted softly through the Grand Meridian Hotel, while servers moved between elegant tables covered in white linen and crystal glassware. Manhattan glowed beyond the towering windows, and every guest seemed eager to be part of the city's most prestigious charity event. Ethan Harrison entered the ballroom with the kind of presence that naturally pulled attention toward him. Investors greeted him. Reporters requested photographs. Business leaders waited for an opportunity to shake his hand. To most people in the room, Ethan appeared to have everything. A billion-dollar company, a respected reputation, a beautiful family, a future that seemed impossible to threaten. Yet appearances rarely tell the entire story. Behind Ethan's confident smile, exhaustion had quietly taken hold. For nearly 6 weeks, he had been sleeping only a few hours each night. His company was preparing for one of the largest expansion projects in its history. Competitors were applying pressure. Investors demanded results. Every decision carried enormous consequences. Every meeting seemed to produce another challenge. Success had brought wealth and influence, but it had also created expectations that never stopped growing. As Ethan greeted guests near the stage, he checked his phone for the 4th time in 10 minutes. New emails continued arriving. Financial updates, market reports, messages from executives. Even during a charity gala, business refused to leave him alone. Across the room, Olivia Harrison watched her husband carefully. She knew him better than anyone else. She recognized the signs that most people missed. The forced smile, the tension around his eyes, the way his shoulders remained stiff even when he tried to relax. Ethan believed he was hiding his stress. He was not. Olivia felt a quiet ache in her heart every time she noticed it. One hand rested gently against her stomach. The child they were expecting had become her greatest source of hope during recent months. Yet it had also become the reason she carried a difficult secret. Inside her purse was a sealed medical envelope she had not yet shown Ethan. Several times she had planned to tell him. Several times she changed her mind. Every day he seemed more overwhelmed than the day before. She kept convincing herself she would find a better moment. Meanwhile, Naomi Carter moved through the ballroom carrying a silver serving tray. Unlike many guests, she paid attention to people rather than status. Years of working events had taught her that wealth often hid struggles the public never saw. She noticed Ethan checking his phone repeatedly. She noticed Olivia watching him with concern. Neither observation seemed important at the time. They were simply small details among hundreds of others. Near one of the corner tables, a group of investors discussed Ethan's recent business achievements. Their admiration was obvious. They described him as brilliant, disciplined, unstoppable. Naomi listened while refilling water glasses. She found it interesting how often successful people were described as machines rather than human beings. Nobody mentioned pressure. Nobody mentioned fear. Nobody mentioned the cost of carrying responsibility for thousands of employees and billions of dollars. They only discussed victories. As the evening progressed, Ethan finally placed his phone in his pocket and attempted to focus on the gala. For a brief moment, he seemed relaxed. Olivia smiled when she saw it. She almost reached for the envelope then. Almost. But before she could gather the courage, another executive approached Ethan with urgent business news. The moment disappeared. Olivia quietly returned the envelope to her purse. Around them, the ballroom sparkled with laughter, music, and celebration. Everything appeared perfect. Yet hidden beneath the polished surface were unanswered worries, unspoken fears, and a decision that would soon change the course of the entire evening. None of them realized it yet, but the calm they were enjoying was already beginning to crack. Olivia Harrison had always believed that love sometimes meant carrying burdens quietly. Looking around the glittering ballroom, nobody would have guessed how much weight she had been carrying alone. Guests saw a confident woman standing beside one of the country's most successful CEOs. They saw elegant clothing, a warm smile, and the glow of a growing family. What they did not see was the envelope resting inside her purse. What they did not see were the sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling while Ethan worked through another round of midnight conference calls. What they did not see was the fear that had followed her for weeks. Earlier that morning, Olivia had visited a specialist for what she believed would be a routine appointment. Instead, she had received news that left her shaken. The doctor had discovered a complication that required close monitoring throughout the remainder of her pregnancy. The situation was manageable. The outlook was positive, but additional tests, extra precautions, and careful observation would be necessary. Most husbands would have been informed immediately. Olivia had intended to tell Ethan the moment she returned home. Then she arrived to find him pacing across his office, speaking with investors while reviewing reports from 3 different departments at once. He looked exhausted, more exhausted than she had ever seen him. That evening was supposed to be important for his company and the charity foundation he supported. She convinced herself the news could wait one more day. Then another. Then another. Every time she planned to tell him, she saw the pressure already sitting on his shoulders and chose silence instead. Standing inside the ballroom now, She wondered whether that silence had become a mistake. Across the room, Ethan laughed politely during a conversation with donors, but Olivia could see the truth beneath the performance. His smile vanished whenever nobody was watching. His eyes drifted constantly toward his phone. Even during moments of celebration, his mind seemed trapped somewhere else. Olivia loved him deeply. That was precisely why she had hidden the envelope. She wanted to protect him from one more source of worry. Unfortunately, secrets rarely remain hidden forever. Nearby, Naomi Carter carried a tray of sparkling water between tables while observing the room with quiet attention. She noticed Olivia touching her purse repeatedly. Not casually, protectively, almost as if she were guarding something important. Naomi had worked enough events to recognize anxiety when she saw it. Wealth did not erase fear. Sometimes it simply concealed it. Behind expensive clothing and practiced smiles. A few minutes later, Olivia stepped away from the crowd and moved toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. She opened her purse slightly and looked at the envelope again. Her fingers tightened around it. The sight lasted only a second before she closed the purse and looked up. Unfortunately, someone else had already noticed. Ethan stood several feet away. His expression changed immediately. He had spent weeks dealing with unexpected problems, hidden negotiations, and difficult surprises. Seeing Olivia conceal an envelope triggered every fear and frustration he had been carrying. Olivia saw the concern in his eyes and immediately understood what was happening. She opened her mouth to explain, but hesitation stopped her. The room continued sparkling with laughter and music. Investors chatted. Waiters moved between tables. Nobody realized they were witnessing the final calm moments before a misunderstanding would begin growing larger than anyone imagined. Naomi glanced toward the couple again. Something in Olivia's expression stood out. It was not the look of someone hiding wrongdoing. It was the look of someone hiding pain. And although Naomi could not yet know why, that small observation would soon become the most important detail of the entire night. Naomi Carter had learned long ago that the most revealing moments in life often arrived in silence. Not the comfortable silence of a peaceful evening, but the uneasy silence that settled over people when something important remained unsaid. As she moved between tables carrying a tray of sparkling water, she watched Ethan and Olivia from a distance. The more she observed them, the less their situation resembled the story everyone else seemed to believe. Ethan looked frustrated. That much was obvious. But frustration and certainty were not the same thing. Olivia looked worried, yet her worry did not appear directed at herself. It appeared directed at him. The distinction mattered. Across the ballroom, donors laughed during conversations about charitable projects. Investors discussed market trends. A jazz trio continued playing softly near the stage. Life carried on. Around the Harrison family, as though nothing unusual was happening. Yet beneath the polished surface of the evening, tension continued growing. Olivia remained near the edge of the ballroom, her hand resting protectively against her purse. Several times she appeared ready to approach Ethan. Several times she stopped herself. Each hesitation seemed to deepen the distance between them. Ethan noticed every one of those moments. Unfortunately, he interpreted them through the lens of exhaustion and stress. During the past month, nearly every unexpected development in his professional life had brought problems, delays, complications, surprises. His mind had become conditioned to expect bad news. The envelope now represented another unknown he could not control. Nearby, Naomi refilled a guest's glass and glanced toward Olivia again. Something about the woman's expression continued bothering her. Olivia did not look like someone protecting herself. She looked like someone protecting another person. Naomi could not explain why she felt so certain. She simply did. Years of observing people had taught her that fear came in different forms. Some people feared consequences. Others feared causing pain. Olivia looked like the second type. A few minutes later, Ethan finally approached his wife. Their conversation remained private, but their body language spoke clearly enough. Ethan asked a question. Olivia hesitated. Ethan asked another. Olivia lowered her eyes. The gap between them widened with every passing second. Around them, guests began noticing. Conversation slowed. Curious glances appeared. Nobody understood the details, but everyone recognized tension when they saw it. Naomi felt a knot forming in her stomach. She had seen misunderstandings before. Sometimes they resolved quickly. Sometimes they grew into something much larger because nobody stopped long enough to listen. Near the stage, Olivia carefully removed the envelope from her purse. For a brief moment, she looked ready to hand it over. Then Ethan's phone rang. The interruption lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet when the call ended, the fragile moment had vanished. Ethan's expression hardened. Whatever information he had received seemed to add another layer of pressure. Olivia quietly lowered the envelope again. Naomi watched the exchange unfold and found herself increasingly unsettled. Every instinct told her that both people were suffering for different reasons. Neither seemed able to see beyond their own fear. The ballroom lights reflected against crystal chandeliers overhead, while music drifted softly through the room. To everyone else, the evening still looked elegant and controlled. Naomi knew better. She could feel something approaching. A misunderstanding was growing larger with every minute. And unless someone found the courage to interrupt it, the consequences would soon unfold in front of everyone watching. The first person to look away was not a guest. It was one of the executives standing near Ethan Harrison. He had watched enough difficult negotiations to recognize when emotions were beginning to overpower judgment. Unfortunately, recognizing a problem and intervening were two different things. Around the ballroom, conversations faded into uneasy whispers. The tension that had been quietly building throughout the evening was now impossible to ignore. Ethan stood facing Olivia, his attention fixed almost entirely on the envelope she continued holding. To him, it represented answers. To Olivia, it represented consequences. Neither saw the situation the same way. That difference was becoming dangerous. "Just tell me what is in it," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. Olivia swallowed. "I will." "Then why not now?" She looked down briefly. "Because I wanted to wait until tonight was over." The answer only deepened his frustration. Weeks of pressure, exhaustion, and uncertainty had left little room for patience. Every delayed conversation felt like another problem waiting to emerge. Around them, guests pretended not to listen while listening to every word. Naomi Carter stood near a service station, holding an empty tray. She had stopped moving entirely. Something about Olivia's voice caught her attention. There was no defiance in it. No manipulation. No anger. Only fear. Fear mixed with concern. The kind of concern people carried when they were trying to protect someone they loved. Ethan did not seem to notice. "You should have trusted me," he said. Olivia's eyes filled with emotion. "That is exactly what I was trying to do." The response confused him. How could secrecy be trust? How could silence be protection? From his perspective, none of it made sense. Several feet away, a donor quietly excused himself from a conversation and moved farther from the growing tension. Other guests followed his example. Nobody wanted to become involved. Nobody wanted to stand between a billionaire CEO and a deeply personal family disagreement. The room was full of powerful people, yet not a single one seemed willing to step forward. Naomi felt increasingly unsettled. She watched Olivia carefully. The pregnant woman's hand never left the envelope. More importantly, she noticed something else. Olivia was not trying to escape the conversation. She was trying to find the right moment to have it. That distinction mattered. Ethan took a slow breath, but instead of calming himself, he seemed to grow more frustrated. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" he asked. Olivia's expression fell. "This is not about appearances. Everything becomes about appearances when hundreds of people are watching." The words hung heavily in the air. For the first time, Olivia looked genuinely hurt. Not because he was angry, because he was no longer listening. Naomi recognized the moment immediately. She had seen versions of it throughout her life. Two people speaking, neither hearing. Fear answering fear. Stress answering stress. Meanwhile, the truth remained trapped between them. The jazz music had stopped. Even the musicians seemed uncertain whether they should continue playing. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across the ballroom, but the atmosphere felt cold. Olivia looked down at the envelope one final time. Tears threatened to appear, yet she fought them back. Ethan noticed her hesitation and misunderstood it completely. The misunderstanding that had been growing all evening finally reached its peak. Around the room, people exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some felt sympathy for Olivia. Others understood Ethan's frustration. Most remained silent. Naomi's grip tightened around the tray in her hands. Every instinct told her something was terribly wrong. Not with the envelope. Not with Olivia. With the assumptions everyone was making. And as she looked around the ballroom full of wealthy, influential people refusing to act, Naomi realized that if nobody else found the courage to step forward, she might soon have to. Naomi Carter did not feel brave when she started walking. In fact, she felt the exact opposite. Her heart pounded against her chest. Her hands felt cold. Every instinct told her to remain where she was and let someone more important step in. The problem was that nobody else was moving. The ballroom remained frozen in silence. Investors stood watching. Executives avoided eye contact. Guests stared into their drinks. Hundreds of people witnessed the misunderstanding unfolding in front of them, yet not a single one seemed willing to interrupt it. Naomi looked at Olivia one more time. The pregnant woman was still holding the envelope. Her shoulders trembled slightly, not from anger, from emotional exhaustion. That was the moment Naomi made her decision. She carefully set her tray down on a nearby table and stepped forward. Several guests immediately noticed. A waitress was not supposed to enter conversations like this. A waitress was supposed to remain invisible. Naomi ignored the looks. She continued walking until she stood several feet away from Ethan and Olivia. The movement drew attention across the entire ballroom. Ethan turned toward her, surprised. Olivia looked equally confused. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Naomi took a careful breath. "Sir," she said respectfully, "maybe there is something you are not seeing." The room became even quieter. Ethan stared at her. "Excuse me." Naomi kept her voice calm. "I do not know what is inside that envelope." She glanced briefly toward Olivia. "But I do not think she is trying to hurt you." Several guests exchanged shocked looks. Nobody could remember the last time someone had interrupted a billionaire CEO in public. Ethan's expression tightened. "This is a private matter." "I understand," Naomi replied. "And I am sorry for speaking out of turn." She paused. "But sometimes when people care about each other, they hide things for the wrong reasons." Olivia looked at Naomi with surprise. It was as though someone had finally spoken the thought she had been unable to express herself. Ethan folded his arms. Weeks of pressure still clouded his judgment, but Naomi's words had forced him to slow down. "You do not know anything about our situation," he said. "No, sir," Naomi answered honestly. "I do not." Then she looked directly at him. "But I know what fear looks like." The statement hung in the air. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Naomi continued carefully. "She does not look afraid of being caught. She looks afraid of causing you pain." Olivia lowered her eyes. Tears finally appeared despite her efforts to hold them back. Ethan saw them immediately. For the first time all evening, he stopped looking at the envelope and started looking at his wife. Really looking at her. Naomi noticed the change. So did everyone else. "When people are hiding something for themselves," Naomi said softly, "they usually protect themselves. She has spent the entire evening trying to protect you." The words landed with surprising force. Olivia closed her eyes briefly. Ethan's expression shifted from frustration to uncertainty. The certainty that had fueled the argument began cracking. Around them, guests watched silently. Even those who disagreed with Naomi could not deny the effect her words were having. Olivia finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I never wanted tonight to become this." Ethan looked at her. "Then help me understand." It was the first genuine request for understanding he had made all evening. Naomi immediately stepped back. She had not walked forward to become the center of attention. She had only wanted to create enough space for two people to hear each other again. As she retreated toward the edge of the crowd, Olivia slowly lifted the envelope in her hands. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Whatever was inside had already changed the course of the evening, and within moments, it would reveal a truth that nobody had expected. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The ballroom remained suspended in silence as Olivia Harrison stared at the envelope in her hands. The tension that had dominated the evening suddenly felt different. Less like conflict, more like anticipation. Ethan stood facing her, no longer demanding answers, no longer trying to control the conversation. Naomi's words had created something that had been missing all night. A pause, a chance to listen. Olivia took a slow breath and carefully opened the envelope. Her hands trembled slightly. Not because she was afraid of the people watching, because she was afraid of hurting the man she loved. Ethan noticed immediately. The realization unsettled him. He had spent so much time focused on what she was hiding that he had failed to consider why she was hiding it. Olivia removed several folded medical documents and held them against her chest for a moment before speaking. 3 weeks ago, my doctor found a complication during a routine examination. A ripple of concern moved through the crowd. Ethan's expression changed instantly. Every trace of frustration disappeared. What kind of complication? He asked quietly. Olivia looked down at the papers. The doctors believe everything will be fine. They are optimistic, but they want additional monitoring and more frequent appointments throughout the pregnancy. Ethan stared at her. The room seemed to disappear around him. Investors, executives, reporters, none of them mattered anymore. Why did you not tell me? He asked. His voice was no longer sharp. It sounded wounded. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Because every day I watched you carrying more pressure than anyone should have to carry. She swallowed hard. The company, the investors, the expansion project. You barely slept. You stopped eating properly. You worried about everyone. She lowered her gaze. I could not bring myself to give you one more thing to worry about. The truth settled over the ballroom like a wave. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. She had sensed something was wrong. She had never imagined it was this. Ethan looked at the medical reports, then at Olivia, then back at the reports. The misunderstanding that had seemed so large only minutes earlier suddenly looked painfully small. You thought protecting me meant carrying this alone? He asked. Olivia nodded. I know it was a mistake. Ethan slowly took the documents from her hands. His eyes moved across the pages. Every line confirmed what she had said. Additional monitoring, preventative care, positive outlook, careful observation. The situation was serious enough to matter, but hopeful enough to manage. Most importantly, Olivia had been facing it alone. Around the room, guests who had silently watched the conflict now understood what had really happened. This was never a story about betrayal. It was a story about fear, love, and two people who had stopped communicating while trying to protect each other. Ethan lowered the papers. His shoulders seemed to sag beneath an invisible weight. You should not have had to carry this by yourself, he said softly. Olivia's composure finally broke. Tears slipped down her cheeks. And you should not have had to carry everything else by yourself. The honesty of the moment struck everyone present. Even Naomi felt her eyes grow warm. Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. For the first time all evening, there was nothing left to argue about. The truth had arrived. Not as an accusation. Not as a scandal. As a reminder that even the strongest people can become isolated when they stop sharing their burdens. Ethan stepped closer to Olivia and gently took her hand. The ballroom watched in complete silence. What happened next would not be remembered because of wealth or status. It would be remembered because two frightened people had finally stopped hiding from each other. For a long moment, Ethan Harrison could not speak. The medical documents remained in his hands, but his attention stayed fixed on Olivia. The noise of the ballroom seemed distant now, as though the rest of the world had stepped away and left only the two of them standing beneath the chandelier lights. Everything that had felt so urgent an hour earlier suddenly appeared insignificant. Market pressures, investor expectations, corporate expansion. None of it mattered as much as the realization that the woman he loved had been carrying fear alone while trying to protect him. Ethan lowered the papers slowly. His eyes moved across Olivia's face, and for the first time in weeks, he truly saw how exhausted she looked. Not physically, emotionally. She had been smiling through worry, carrying uncertainty behind every reassuring word. Why did you think you had to do this by yourself? He asked quietly. Olivia gave a sad smile. Because every time I looked at you, I saw someone carrying the weight of an entire company. Ethan shook his head. You and our child were never supposed to be another weight. The honesty in his voice made several guests lower their eyes. Around the ballroom, people who had silently watched the misunderstanding unfold now witnessed something much more powerful. Accountability. Not the kind forced by public pressure, but the kind that comes when someone finally sees their own mistake. Ethan took a deep breath. I was so focused on my fears that I never stopped to ask about yours. Olivia reached for his hand. I should have trusted you with the truth. And I should have listened before assuming the worst. The words seemed to release something between them. The tension that had filled the room all evening began to fade. Nearby, Naomi Carter remained near the edge of the crowd. She wanted nothing more than to quietly return to work. Yet she could not help watching. Not because she enjoyed the attention. Because she understood how rare moments like this were. Most misunderstandings do not end when someone wins. They end when someone chooses to understand. Ethan glanced across the ballroom and noticed Naomi standing near a service station. Their eyes met briefly. For a second, neither moved. Then Ethan gave a small nod. It was not a grand gesture. It was something more meaningful. Recognition. The acknowledgement that one person had been willing to step forward when everyone else remained silent. Around them, conversations slowly resumed. The musicians began playing again. Guests returned to their tables. Yet the atmosphere felt different than before. Warmer. Lighter. As if the entire room had taken a collective breath. Several investors who had witnessed the exchange quietly spoke about family rather than business. Others checked messages from spouses and children. The evening had unexpectedly reminded everyone of something success often makes people forget. The people waiting for us at home matter more than the applause waiting for us in public. Ethan carefully folded the medical documents and handed them back to Olivia. Tomorrow we call the doctors together, he said. Olivia nodded. Together. The single word carried more strength than any speech delivered that night. Standing beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, Ethan finally understood that strength was not measured by how much pressure a person could carry alone. Real strength came from allowing others to help carry it. And as he looked once more toward Naomi, he realized that the most important lesson of the evening had come from someone the entire ballroom had almost overlooked. The gala ended differently than anyone expected. An hour earlier, people had arrived hoping to witness another successful evening hosted by one of the most powerful business leaders in New York. Instead, they left carrying a lesson they would remember for years. The music continued softly as guests prepared to leave, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Conversations no longer revolved around investments, expansion plans, or financial forecasts. They revolved around family, trust, and the importance of listening before judging. Ethan Harrison stood beside Olivia, his hand resting gently over hers. The distance that had separated them throughout the evening was gone. In its place was something stronger. Understanding. Not perfect understanding. Not instant solutions. But the willingness to face the future together. Olivia looked calmer than she had all night. The burden she had been carrying alone was finally shared. For the first time in weeks, she no longer felt responsible for protecting everyone by herself. Ethan glanced toward the ballroom entrance where Naomi Carter was quietly collecting glasses and helping the staff prepare for closing. Most guests had already forgotten the details of the evening. They would remember the emotion. They would remember the courage. And whether they realized it or not, much of that courage had come from a woman wearing a simple black apron. Ethan walked across the ballroom. Several guests watched with curiosity. Naomi looked up as he approached. "Miss Carter," he said. Naomi smiled politely. "Sir." Ethan paused for a moment. Finding the right words seemed surprisingly difficult. He had delivered speeches to thousands of shareholders without hesitation. Yet gratitude required a different kind of honesty. "Thank you," he finally said. Naomi looked surprised. "You do not need to thank me." "Yes, I do." Ethan glanced briefly toward Olivia. Everyone else saw a situation and stayed silent. "You saw people." Naomi lowered her eyes modestly. "I only said what I felt. That is exactly why it mattered." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Olivia joined them. Her smile was warm and sincere. "You helped us hear each other again," she said. Naomi felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. She had not stepped forward because she expected recognition. She had stepped forward because remaining silent felt wrong. Olivia gently touched Naomi's arm. "Our child is going to grow up hearing this story." Naomi laughed softly. "Then please make me sound much braver than I actually was." The three of them shared a quiet smile. Around them, the ballroom lights began dimming. Staff members folded tablecloths. Musicians packed away instruments. The evening was coming to an end. Yet something important had begun. Ethan looked around the nearly empty room. For years he had believed success meant carrying every burden himself. Tonight had taught him otherwise. Strength was not found in isolation. It was found in connection, in listening, in allowing others to help. As Naomi prepared to leave, she returned to being exactly what she had always been. Not a celebrity, not a hero seeking attention, simply a woman who chose compassion when it mattered. She walked toward the employee exit while the city lights shimmered beyond the windows. Behind her stood a family moving toward healing. Ahead of her waited an ordinary tomorrow. Yet sometimes the most extraordinary changes begin with an ordinary person refusing to look away. Ethan had money. Olivia had love. But on that night, the greatest gift in the room was courage. And courage saved something that wealth never could.